So Anu, wonderful to see you. Thank you very much for agreeing to do this interview as part of the Green Swans Observatory. When we first met, you were working with Ben and Jerry's, I recall. So how did that happen, and what brought you to that point before we get into the next steps?
Yeah, sometimes you can backtrace your career and try to make sense of it, but often it doesn't. So often it's really where your heart takes you. So I've had a long career as a business person with Unilever, and the beauty of being in a large organization is that certainly in the beginning you can't necessarily choose where you want to go, but as you realize and learn more about yourself, you can be more focused and forensic about the kind of businesses and the kind of places that you choose to be. So I think a bit of luck and a bit of intentionality has meant that I've been really working with businesses, with brands that have been quite different. Dove was, pioneer in its time about really talking about changing the narrative in society. And Ben and Jerry's, I think, as you are intentional, you kind of the right things fall in your place. And with Ben and Jerry's, it was one of those where really it's a beautiful business that was acquired 40 years ago, right at the start, with Ben and Jerry wanting to do business differently. And that was, just as capitalism was massively taking off and the flower power generation was almost giving up. So at that point of time, they really felt that they could zig when everyone was zagging and do things differently. Moving from Ben and Jerry's to Pukka was not a difficult decision, because I'd been looking at Pukka as a sister B Corp, and I knew how deep and how intentional and how beautiful that business was. I think it was more difficult for my kids because they were absolutely shocked that I was going to leave Ben and Jerry's and all that lovely ice cream to go for tea, which, as you can imagine.
It's funny because in 1999, I was invited to go to the state of Georgia in the States for a Ben and Jerry's board meeting. And it was the one where they were having to decide whether they would sell out or not, and whether, if so, who to. And right in the middle of it, Hurricane Floyd hit, and we all had to stream. We were on an island off the coast, Cumberland Island, and we had to stream back towards Atlanta and so on. And it was like something from Gone with the Wind. I mean, there were 1.5 million people moving on the coast all at the same time. But afterwards, I felt I was actually written into the bill of sale of Ben and Jerry's, ultimately to Unilever, which was then struck out by the Securities and Exchange Commission as illegal, but at least we tried. But then afterwards, I saw how Ben and Jerry's was taken on by Unilever. Best of intentions on both sides, but initially, Ben and Jerry's feeling quite squeezed, and some of the original values perhaps suffering a bit as a result. And therefore, and it's got better clearly, and that's reflected in what you just said. But it's part of what interests me about how big companies like Unilever and others best pull in or develop themselves and nurture these sort of small businesses. And I think Unilever has now about 8 B corporations. Is it? Yeah. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think so. That's absolutely right. I think the reason I love what I do is that you're really sitting at a place where you can see that businesses can be a force for good. Yeah. We'll go on to talk about regeneration and organic, etc. And sometimes we get muddled in terms or terminologies. But and maybe because I come from an Indian background where if you want to see change, you change yourself. So it's internal out. So businesses like Pukka, yes, there's a big role to play in the world, but the focus very much is how are we intentionally going to be doing the right thing. And I think when you have that, when you create that system, which is very much focused on being a pioneer, in a way being the ugly duckling, right? Because you're lonely, you're pioneering, and then you have to almost find the right structures. And we'll go on to talk about the challenges that come with being the ugly duckling and setting that through. That itself is inspiring. That itself creates a system which is quite mindful in terms of the people, the culture, and therefore successful. And if something is successful in that integrity, you'll be a fool to break that.
And so what sort of creature were you originally, Anu? I mean, were you an economist, an engineer, an accountant, a lawyer? What background did you have?
Yeah, I was an economist.
One of them.
One of them. And in fact, just recently, I found my old book, Small is Beautiful.
Yeah.
And I had read it just as I was leaving my studies world to the business world. And I remember underlying various parts of that book. And then recently, 3 years later, I came back to it and I said, oh my God, why did I not pick this up for the last 25 years?
Well, it's funny because it was very much a creature of its time, Small is Beautiful, and it had a huge impact on my thinking, but I didn't always feel that the smaller the better. I think sometimes you need to do things at scale as long as they're the right sorts of things. So what took you then from Ben & Jerry's to Pukka? Or maybe it was you already in Unilever, and was there a sort of moment where somebody said, you need to go to Siberia, off you go to Pukka, you've enjoyed Ben & Jerry's too much?
Long. No, it was definitely me. So I've been, as I said, so I've been part of the B Corp organization, seeing Pukka for a while. It was definitely me, where you really know that how it is to be in an organization that started small. So this is the 20th year of Pukka. Pukka was started in 2001 by Tim and Sebastian. Tim being a ethical entrepreneur and Sebastian being a herbalist who really wanted to get the best herbs to consumers. So it's 20 years since they started, and I, being a business person myself, I've seen how you can have absolutely the right principles at the start, and then you grow, and then growth is by itself beautiful and challenging, like any teenager might not tell you or might tell you, and therefore it was. I almost felt a calling to be part of this business in its next phase of growth, where you can really still take the impact that you want to make, that the business wants to make, that the people at Pukka want to make, keep it at the heart of it, and find the right way to scale to grow. So exactly what you said about small is beautiful is that what excites me. How do you take something that's small, that's beautiful, and keep it small and beautiful and scale it?
Well, in a sense, so much has changed. And I set up a company with a couple of colleagues, sustainability, back in 1987. I had no idea of selling that. I mean, way over 25 years later, after I left, it was sold first to ERM and then to KKR. If somebody had told me in 1987 that KKR, the barbarians of the gate, would own a little company that we were evolving at that stage, I would have seen that as catastrophic failure. And yet nowadays it's possibly a symptom of the fact that these agendas are beginning to mainstream. And that's what I'd love to come on to next with the Pukka story. I mean, how did the presumably acquisition of Pukka by Unilever happen?
I think it's that, as you grow, that there's now the growth is beyond what you need more investment and resources to grow this further and take on that mission. That's what's really important, to keep that in mind, to take this mission on further. Pukka was acquired in 2017. It's more than quadrupled its growth since then, while continuing to really keep mission and impact at the heart. And I think that's important to keep in mind. It's very much a B Corp. We're going into a third round of B Corp certification right now, and that's the beauty, that's the challenge of how do you kind of really make sure however the ownership is, after a while, the ownership and the start is extremely important, but after a while, an organism has a life of its own that needs to be sustained. And I think that's where the important focus is. How do you make sure that you're true to what you set out to be, and you have to continuously evolve that. So the team, the people, just before I came, in fact, really put down the healthy living philosophy together, which codifies what Pukka believes in doing. So Pukka believes in nurturing healthier, happier lives through the power of organic herbs. And really, what does that mean? That's the what that we do, but how we do it, best practice, organic, planetary health, business as a force for good. All of these are then really important. And how do you codify them? How do you make them an integral part of your P&L so that as you grow, this grows as well?
So can you give us some vital statistics on the business? I mean, sort of what is its size and numbers of people employed and that sort of thing?
First of all, this year, it's become UK's #1 fruit and herbal brand.
Well done.
So that's Nielsen numbers for you. So that's and that is we're talking about ugly swan or the ugly duckling to a swan. A market share number is a good external number to kind of talk about because and also pioneering to move fruit and herbal up in the lives of UK consumers. So that's definitely a big credit to all the hard work that's gone behind. It is a global company, so we are present in many more countries around the world. It's headquartered here in Bristol, and there are around 150 people in the Bristol office that work here. But of course, then there's teams across the world as well, which really make sure that we execute Pukka in the beautiful way that it is. I think sometimes, and this is what I learned at Ben & Jerry's, there's one aspect of it, which is the Pukka people who are within a Pukka contract or a Ben & Jerry contract itself. But I think businesses like this, it's really the entire supply chain that's really important. And that's not necessarily part of the business, but the farmers that work with Pukka are really, really important. The wild pickers who work with Fair for Life or Fair Wild, in our farms to pick the wild herbs are equally important. So while you can say that you might define people with those who are within, your incorporated house, it's actually the entire supply chain, the linked prosperity of it, that's really, really important for businesses like Ben & Jerry's and like Pukka.
Well, I think I mentioned I started this morning with a cup of Supreme Matcha Green Tea by Pukka, and I have to say it was really, really good. So the product has to be good, but then the supply chain, as you say, has to be extremely well managed. Now, you mentioned the organic agenda, and people are talking about sustainability, and they're talking about shared value, and they're talking about regeneration and so on. How do you think of all of this? What are you actually trying to do, both back through the supply chain and into the minds and tastes of consumers?
Yeah, so we are an organic business, and that's as I said, started 20 years ago, when that was the best way to be able to make sure that you're getting the best herbs without pesticides, but also what is sequestering carbon back into the environment, increasing the biodiversity, soil health, and building sustained livelihoods. Right. So these are the basic organic principles. And for a small company that starts off, you want to really make sure that you're holding yourself accountable to the best practices possible. And I think that's where the role of, if you keep impact as the core focus of what you're doing, then you want to make sure that you're measuring yourself year on year and you're holding yourself accountable to that year on year. That's where certifications play its role, because certifications are external. So they help you to have certifications. I think today, as like you rightly said, the regeneration is becoming a buzzword. It's becoming a big word across. I think the way I see it is that we want the world to be going in the right direction, right? We don't want to be holding on to our parochial titles and certifications. We want everyone to embrace the principles of sequestering carbon, giving back more than they take away. So I think that's a very welcome thing.
Yes.
That there's more and more. If EU says they want 25% of all their farms to now be organic farms, that's great. Yeah, and that's absolutely a welcome. I think as a business that's been pioneering some years ago, there are many challenges. And that's why we welcome this. There are many challenges because none of this was set up before. It is almost set up organic farming in the different markets. Now, Pukka has 200 herbs or ingredients that we need from over 35 countries in the world. All the supply chain needs to be set up. So now if more and more companies and countries come into this, of course, that's going to be good. We just want to make sure that it's good at the high level, at the high standards.
And has Pukka launched herb-based products that it was really excited about, but then found that the consumer wasn't terribly interested? Do you have things that bomb or fail?
Yes, many. Many. And you have to continuously keep trying. So I think there were lattes in the market. There were other things before. You keep trying. And I think you keep trying because you have the vision, as laser focused, that how do we find the best way to bring powerful organic herbs into the lives of consumers.
And where are you headed? I mean, both personally and well, perhaps more on Pukka for the moment, but what do you, is this simply cranking the handle on a business model that already works, or do you see ways of evolving it further over time? And clearly competitors will be listening very assiduously to hear what your thinking might be, but any thoughts on that would be welcome.
I go back to the purpose of the business and a purpose of a business like Pukka, because if you really say that what the world needs more is more people connected to nature, what we humans need more is really more plants in our lives, and more powerful organic plants in our lives, then our job's not done at all.
Well, maybe one final question. And you mentioned powerful plants. And, when I was sent away at school when I came back to Britain when I was 9. And one of the things I did, and I was reflecting on it recently, was just taste every plant I came across. And the school had grounds and lots of exotic plants from its sort of deep history. And I sort of stumbled across things like wild garlic, which I absolutely loved, although the management of the school thought it was appalling that I was roaming around the woods eating all these strange things. Do you find there's in a country like Britain a growing taste for herbs, powerful plants, these sorts of things? I mean, around the sort of Small is Beautiful era, sort of 60s, 70s, there was a huge blossoming of herbalism and interest in it. Is that still vibrant, or in some ways it was that back then and that was Everest, and now we're back down in the foothills again? It's
not enough at all. So absolutely not enough at all. I think right now, the focus back on health and back on COVID has kind of made everyone a little bit more vulnerable, right? So there is more of a desire to really understand more about how do I keep my immunity sustained for a long term, rather than just a quick white pill that will solve the problem. But by no means is this wide enough at all. Of course, I come from a culture in India where that's much more pervasive. People know what turmeric tastes like. People know what ginger tastes like. So there's definitely a big job to be done to make herbs part of your life, and that's why you asked the question about innovation. There are many more powerful ways to get herbs into people's lives, but possibly the most accessible is through tea. And that's why there were lots of supplements, lots of other tonics, etc., that Pukka started in the early days. But tea has become the core, the hero of it, not necessarily the core, but the hero range, because it's the most accessible way to get herbs into your lives. I completely believe, that was your question at the beginning, that businesses can be a force for good. Business is one of the best way in which you can bring profitability, financial metrics together with social and economic and ecological benefits.
Well, more power to you, Anu, and to Pukka Herbs, whether it comes from the herbs themselves or just, you are clearly channeling forces much bigger than any of us. So it's very exciting. And the idea that, in the new entity, a range of different Unilever teas will be brought together. What an opportunity that might be for spreading some of your principles even deeper into the heart of the beast. So thank you immensely for taking the time today, and we'll be watching you very carefully to see how this game plays out.
And enjoy your tea. I can suggest more fabulous teas to try.
I'm open to that immensely. Thank you, Anu.
Thanks a lot.